Everything in life starts with you and your values. Nobody ever brings us up to behave well in bed, but they should. This is about bringing your children up to behave well sexually, to operate good sexual values and good sexual behavior as much as you bring them up to behave well in every other respect.
I can't imagine not wanting to have a nice, safe space to learn some tips and tricks to make sure that you are a known legend in these streets.
Sex education, we were getting sex education, it was through the worst means possible.
We set young people up to fail, more now so than ever, I think. A huge round of applause for my wonderful panellists. Tonight, we're going to be discussing why sex education matters, where we're currently going so very wrong, and where Make Love Not Porn can help steer us right. So to kick us off, I really want to kind of better understand from each of you why this is something that you care about so deeply. Jameela, I'm going to start with you first. As your kind of professional engagement, as it were, with the topic of sex, and particularly porn, began some kind of 10 years or so ago when you presented a documentary about porn for the BBC. I know you've since gone on to host a two-part radio show for the BBC on consent. You wrote a blog on the topic. You've been kind of hugely influential in making Tonight happen. So it's obviously a topic that you have really kind of dug into, and it's something you care about a lot now. Nonetheless, you do kind of consider yourself, or having been quite kind of prudish in your relationship to sex, which I know you've kind of put down to perhaps your kind of upbringing, household, and attitudes towards sex there. Can you just tell us, why is sex education something that you care about so deeply, and why specifically this academy and what we're discussing here tonight?
I just think sex is such a pivotal and natural part of so many people's lives, and I don't think that we gain anything by being mystified and in the dark around such a massive subject that can have such a long-term effect in your life, especially if it goes wrong. I was saying to you earlier backstage that I think we make a mistake when we see ignorance and innocence as mutually exclusive. In my opinion, one of the greatest ways that my innocence could have been preserved is had someone given me a heads up about what was coming, or what to look out for in a predator, or what to say I do or don't feel ready for in the bedroom, and that actually would have preserved my innocence far longer. I think to find an age-appropriate way to communicate to different people from different backgrounds how they can protect themselves, and that to me is true innocence, when someone hasn't been able to take something away from you. The reason the documentary first caught my eye back then is the fact that it shocked me that they wanted to give sex education to 5-year-olds. And my first reaction was a little bit of horror. And then they explained to me that it's very simple, it's very age appropriate. It's just things like, you can't touch me here, you can't touch me here, you can't touch me here, you can't touch me here. And it's a massive deterrent for any kind of predator, because they know that it's much harder to groom a child who is at least aware of the very basics of self-preservation and their own protection and safety. And that's when I jumped in and started, and then it just kind of opened my mind, blew my mind, and I realized that I don't think having prudish and very, intensive South Asian background did me any favours in preparing me for a life in London. And so it's something that I care deeply about, and I can't think of anyone who handles this better and with more care and love and compassion and experience than Cindy. And I think what she's doing with Make Love Not Porn and the Academy is so important, and it's so destigmatizing. And I think that that's so brilliant that everyone has some sort of age-appropriate avenue within which they can access information that they might feel too shy to ask about. And if we push people into the shadows and we continue to make these conversations uncomfortable, then those people will go onto the internet. And we know that is not always where you find the best information. So thank fuck for Cindy.
Thank fuck for Cindy could actually be kind of the tagline for tonight throughout this conversation. Freddie, what about you? You, as I said very briefly at the beginning, when you were working at the News Movement, you presented a documentary exploring Andrew Tate, the misogynist extremist, who really, I guess, has become kind of the poster child for the so-called crisis of masculinity. Now, in a Guardian interview, I think earlier this year, you said that your personal impetus for doing the documentary was that you felt an acute sense of responsibility given the sexist behaviour I engaged in as a teenager. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your own personal experiences have driven kind of the focus of your work, specifically around kind of crisis of masculinity, and why the future of sex education is something that matters to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I wrote an article in The Guardian, which was promoting some work I did when I worked at the news movement, looking at Andrew Tate. We made a few documentaries about his rise to fame, how he did it, what the ramifications were, and they wanted a young person's lens. Now, why do I care about this? I guess, look, on one side, it's about responsibility. Like we know in the epidemic of sexual violence that we're seeing, that women are primarily the victims. The people you see speak up about this most often than not are women. But it's done most often but not by men. So there's a disparity there, right? And I wanted to be part of a conversation that redressed that. And on the other side of it was accountability. And it would have been completely remiss of me to do any of this work and not recognize the behavior that I engaged in as a teenager. And without going into too much detail, you know, I participated in the culture that I want to see change. And I feel a lot of guilt about that. I feel a lot of shame. Still feels difficult talking about it with loads of cameras in front of you, even when there's not a single friend in my life who doesn't know how much I care about this and how much I'm trying to define myself in contrast to the mistakes that I made. But that's why I care, you know, and maybe we can talk about this, you know, why aren't there more young men speaking up? I guess part of it is because, you know, you don't throw stones if you live in glass houses and all that. Like, if you didn't do something yourself, and I was someone who did, you know, maybe you were friends with somebody and you participated in enabling them to do that. And it's confusing with teenagers, or I was a teenager at that time, and I look back now, and one of the things I think and I care about is like, what did I need, or what sort of intervention was needed for me not to make or not to take the decisions that I did? And if I can at all participate now through the things that I've learned, through the work that I've done in changing that, I guess it would make me feel a bit better about the person I am today in front of all of you lot. So, yeah, it's complicated.
Sorry, massive round of applause for that level of vulnerability.
And thank you so much. I think you raised so many important points there. Particularly, I think, really, we'll go into this kind of the main thrust of the conversation, but how in having such a poor sex education, I think most of us have had, we really set everyone up to fail. The fact that you said kind of you now feel a lot of shame around the way you were and some actions that you had, and I think you alluded to it there, the web of complicity that surrounds the culture of sexism and misogyny. We're all complicit. And I think now, particularly with sex education being what it is, being so impoverished, the conversation we have around sex being so kind of taboo-laden, we set young people up to fail, more now so than ever, I think, because of what is available online, which we'll go into that in more depth momentarily. So thank you, Freddie, for sharing that, and as Jameela said, for your vulnerability there. Cindy, I want to turn to you now. You just gave a fantastic kind of presentation outlining your vision for how the Academy can change the sex education landscape. But you gave an interview to Fortune magazine some 9 years ago, I believe it was, in which you outlined this very vision for the Academy that we're discussing this evening. And I know you've been fundraising or attempting to fundraise for the Academy since then and have been up against that taboo which anyone who works in the space of sex will be all too familiar with, that people recoil when you talk about sex. It's confronting for people. And so I know that has been a struggle with fundraising, hence why we're here this evening. I'm sensing a real kind of urgency to what you're doing now, especially with the conversation we're having this evening. Why now? Why now is the moment this Academy needs to start?
So, it's been 15 years of Make Love Not Porn ever since my TED Talk, launching Make Love Not Porn in its original iteration, which was a kind of porn world versus real world public service announcement. I've spent 15 years ever since then dealing with what began happening immediately, an avalanche of emails, comments, conversations, seeing firsthand the enormous human unhappiness and misery caused by the shame, guilt, and embarrassment that we've imbued sex with. And I've heard harrowing stories from individuals, from parents, from teachers, etc. But over the years, those stories have come to light for everybody. So what I was actually pretty much the first person to identify, publicly all those years ago, when we don't talk about sex, porn becomes sex education by default. We now see the evidence of that all around us. And I have to tell you that one interesting way we are especially seeing urgency around this at Make Love Not Porn is some years ago, parents began writing to us saying they wanted to buy subscriptions to Make Love Not Porn for their teenage and 20-something children because, and I quote, "I want my kids to see what happy, healthy, loving sexual relationships actually look like." Those emails from parents have gotten much more frequent and much more desperate. So just in the past couple of months alone, parents are writing to us saying, as one mother said, "My 13-year-old son is watching Pornhub. I'm really worried. I know you're an 18 and over site, but I would really like to give him access to your videos instead of what he's watching." You know, a mother wrote to us just yesterday saying, "My husband and I want to give access to Make Love Not Porn for our teenage son. I know you're over 18. There must be a workaround for this. We want to set up an account that is entirely secure for him. We have no access." Literally, the desperation on the parental side is happening because they are encountering very directly everything we're talking about today. And so we are at a point where, you know, I think it's incredibly important, as Jameela said, that sex education starts as early as possible. There are actually many educators out there creating amazing work that enables you to educate as early as possible. But as we all know, that work is being censored and blocked everywhere. In the US, where I'm based, it is illegal in a number of states to educate children about sex. We are seeing a ton of negative impacts, and if we can just provide access to sex education that's age-appropriate, culturally appropriate, you know, you can pick and choose. You can absolutely decide on the academy what your comfort level is. But another reason also why this is urgent is, at the academy, our mission is to help organize the world's sex education information. That is a deliberate paraphrase of Google's original mission statement, which was, "We want to help organize the world's information," because they're not. The algorithm itself is biased. And so as we see big tech take more and more control of our lives in all sorts of ways, it's incredibly important that we build through the female lens to counter all of that with things that we know can help.
You mentioned there, Cindy, that when we don't have proper sex education, when these conversations are shut down, when they're rendered taboo, when we're not allowed to talk about these things, it doesn't mean suddenly people don't want to learn about sex, or that they're not having sex. Imagine that. It means that people are going to what is readily available online, which is pornography. And I want to say, kind of right at the outset, this conversation will not be an anti-porn, obviously, conversation at all. I think it's about acknowledging that, one, porn is not a monolith. There are so many different types of porn, obviously, as we're discussing here this evening. But the readily available porn that is often free online, there is a lot of misogynistic, fetishistic, problematic pornography that is, as we can see, kind of causing quite a lot of damage. So Jameela, I want to turn to you again on this, because we mentioned at the very start, you fronted this documentary back in 2014 about the porn landscape then. And I'd just be curious to know, we're kind of 10 years on, we've seen the evolution of social media platforms, the proliferation of online pornography. I mean, I think Cindy mentioned some stats at the very beginning, but just to give you a sense, in 2020, the world's 4 largest porn platforms received nearly 11 billion visitors each month. That is more visitors than visited Amazon, LinkedIn, Netflix, Zoom, and eBay combined. It's huge. The average age of which children now see pornography is around 13, and 79% of children have encountered violent pornography before the age of 18. In these ensuing 10 years since you made that documentary, how have you seen the porn industry and our relationship to it evolve?
I mean, it's just exploded. The statistics you've given us there show that, and younger people, I don't even think it's really 13-year-olds who are looking at pornography. Even when I made that documentary back in 2013, 10 and 11 was the average age that kids were starting to watch this content. And now that we have social media that has really exploded in that time. Pornography has made its way into mainstream platforms, and it's very rare to see that moderated in any way. So it's hyper-normalized, but not in the way that I think Make Love Not Porn aspires to hypernormalize sex, right? I think that what you are, your tagline is pro-sex, pro-porn, pro-knowing the difference. And I think that what we see online, whether it's on OnlyFans or Instagram or Twitter even, I see obscene imagery that just kind of pops up all the time on all kinds of different platforms. And to me, it's not hyper-normalizing normal people having normal sex. It's always what is the most extreme. I think one of the things that really disturbs me about the homepage of Pornhub is that it's not necessarily the sexiest or most erotic thing that makes it to the top of the algorithm. It's the most shocking video. It's the most shareable, viral, scary or offensive moment that people are watching, sometimes not really to masturbate to, but just to watch because they can't believe what they're seeing. So that's what gets pushed to the top. And so some young person who's going to go onto the website thinks, well, this is what other people must be looking at, this is what I should be looking at, and then it starts to infiltrate their taste, or it starts to dictate their taste. So many of the children I spoke to when I was making that documentary, I was talking to some children as young as the ages of 11 who were engaging in anal sex. And the girls were telling me that they don't like it, but they think they're supposed to like it because the girls in the videos like it. And the boys were telling me that they didn't enjoy it themselves. These are young straight boys, and they were like, I'm not enjoying this, but I know I'm supposed to like it because of the videos, so I push through. One of the things we had to cut out of that documentary was a little boy saying that he was 12 years old, he put his hand up in the class, and he asked a question so sincerely. He said, "Miss, if I rape a girl, will she start to like it the way they do in the videos?" That's a 12-year-old child. He was completely innocent. This is a little kid who's a virgin, who doesn't understand what he's even really looking at. He's just at the precipice of his sexuality. And he meant it as a genuine question, because that's what he's been taught, that's what he's been explicitly shown. And so to protect him, we took that out. But it was a moment that stunned the entire room, and we had to kind of cover for it and not freak him out or, make him afraid to ask these kinds of questions, because Christ, we have to let children be safe to ask these kind of questions, but we don't even know what they're looking at. So I think things are much worse and much scarier now and much more accessible. And I think that contributes to the emergency as to why work like Cindy's needs to exist.
It goes back to what I said before, that we're setting young children up to fail by not equipping them with the knowledge nor the language to understand what they're seeing online when they do see pornography. Which, imagine if that's the first experience, if that is the first experience you ever have of sex, is watching something that you see, that the algorithm serves you online. What does that do to someone's sense of self, their relationship to their body, how they then go and approach intimacy? And again, we're setting children up to fail in that. Freddie, can I just turn to you on this? We spoke about this briefly when we chatted before this interview. Can I just ask, kind of on a kind of personal, anecdotal level amongst you and your friends, as the resident Gen Z amongst us, spokesperson for young people, what kind of age, I'm not saying you have to say this personally to yourself, but what kind of age did you and your friends begin to watch porn, and how did that shape your relationship to sex and to intimacy?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, broadly speaking, it fucks people up, like, just to be honest. I saw porn at a really young age. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs because, to be honest with you, it is a bit traumatic. Like, I don't really enjoy talking about it. There's only a few people in my life, actually, that I really open up to about that sort of stuff. But I can tell you for fact, anecdotally, that, by the time people were around, year 3, year 4, unless I'm talking about 7, 8, 9, porn was being spoken about amongst us as a peer group. And people were watching it, and it was the thing that we spoke about when we were about 11 or 12. So this dovetails with and backs up your point, Jameela, about what you've found in your documentary. I don't know, I'm not actually the spokesperson for young people. I don't know if that's the same for every single other young person, but it is fucking scary, right? Like, it was my first understanding of what sex was porn. Is my first talk about the paucity of sex education. We were getting sex education. It was through the worst means possible, arguably. And I think it does give people a really warped understanding about what they're into, what they want to happen when they start to experience intimacy and explore it. And there's a weird sort of, because even though people are talking about it, it's not like they're having a really, nuanced conversation. It's like the same conversations that young men have, which is kind of like, who's the most out there and insane, and like, it's a bit of a competition, right? And that's also not helpful, because again, what's that going to perpetuate? Like your algorithms is going to put the most extreme stuff kind of out in as the norm. And then everyone's trying to cohere themselves around that. And what you said earlier, Jameela, about young men saying, I didn't even want to do that. That is a thing that I know plenty of young men have said to me in private, that they did it because they thought that they had to. And that's really confusing when we're talking about some of the most kind of baroque sexual stuff you could possibly do. So, I do think that this is where something like what you're trying to do, Cindy, is so important. We need to get real, right? Young people are engaging at this in a rate that they're not going to want to tell you because you're their sister or their mother or their father or whatever. Why the fuck are they going to want to be honest with you about that? But we need to get real and be like, this is actually happening, and what are the effects that are happening as a result of it? Porn can easily be like the violent video games. Are people violent because they're playing Call of Duty? Probably not. Really, actually, what we're talking about is a cultural problem that we have around sexual assault and rape culture, misogyny embedded deeply in our society. Part of that is being exacerbated by the issues that we're finding with exposure to violent pornography and the ease of access that's happened. And as you say, Twitter is just the place for that now.
Can I quickly tag on to what you're saying, as one of the things that I think we have trouble with, especially when it comes to children watching this sort of thing, or young impressionable people, is that, with fantasy, like let's say Avatar, the people are blue, or the Marvel people look different, or they have scales, or they have a big outfit on and they're shooting blue out of their eyes. I think that it's so much easier for them to identify, oh, this isn't real. And so much of the most extreme pornography, there's nothing that tells you, that signals to you as a child, this isn't real, this is fantastical, this is from a maniac director's, imagination. This just looks like people who you would see anywhere walking down the street, who are engaging in this. And so there's nothing that signals to a child that this is not what everyday sex is supposed to look like. Hearing about that girl who was left paralyzed because of a choking incident that went wrong with her boyfriend has shaken me. Like that is so unbelievable that this conversation around choking is so commonplace, and yet very few people know what they're doing, know how long is safe to do it. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm 38, so I can't imagine a 13-year-old is looking into all these things. And these are things that people enjoy and they might want to participate in, but there are ways to do this in an informed way where you feel safe and where you are safe.
And I always think sex education gives us, when done well, a filtering system through which to understand what we're seeing online, for example, to be able to understand when something is fanciful, when it's being, exaggerated for effect. Good sex education, I think, lays a foundation that allows us to be able to understand good information, bad information, something that could be kind of inspiring, but maybe I'm going to leave it for now. And so when you don't have good sex education, you have young people who are just being hyper-exposed to this content online without understanding what to make of it, how to understand it. And so and if this is all they know about sex, if this is their only introduction to sex, then they go and experiment in in an intimate setting with someone they know. And the consequences can also be so long-term. So I think the trauma that we then create that occurs when someone has, disturbing sexual experience, that doesn't go away. That lives with someone for the rest of their life. And on that point, Cindy, I want to turn to you briefly on this. We're talking now about the damage that is being done when we don't have proper sex education, when we have this, what I often call a broken sex culture, specifically with regards to young people. And we know now that one child is raped in school on every single school day in the UK. And recent research by The Observer showed a 40% increase in reports of sexual assault and rape over the past few years, with a greater increase in reports and incidents on school property. So the problems that we're discussing here today are happening at a younger and younger age amongst our population. Cindy, what role do you specifically see sex education as playing when it comes to combating this epidemic of sexual violence that we're witnessing amongst young people now?
Do you know, I mean, I think, first of all, it's incredibly important that this starts in the home. Okay, parents absolutely cannot leave this to school and sex education classes. And then I really encourage parents to think about sex education in a much broader and very different way. I designed Make Love Not Porn around all my own beliefs and philosophies, one of which is that everything in life starts with you and your values. So I regularly ask people this question: what are your sexual values? And nobody can ever answer me because we're not taught to think like that. Our parents bring us up to have good manners, a work ethic, sense of responsibility, accountability. Nobody ever brings us up to behave well in bed. But they should, because in bed, values like empathy, sensitivity, generosity, kindness, honesty, trust, respect are as important as those values are in every other area of our lives where we're actively taught to exercise them. So I say to parents, it is literally about inculcating for the bedroom the same values that you inculcate in every other area. And by the way, what is not true, because I've had people say this to me, is, oh, but Cindy, if you have good values generally, those will translate into the bedroom. No, they don't. I am my own research lab. I'm very open about the fact that I date younger men casually and recreationally. I've dated a lot of them. And I'm very selective about whom I date. Number one criterion is they have to be a very nice person. I have fantastic radar for very nice people. I only date utterly lovely younger men in an atmosphere of mutual trust, respect, affection, and liking. And still, when we get into bed, I see them modeling the body language that says, my dick is the center of the universe and it's all about me. And that's because they have unconsciously internalized what male-centric, male-lens porn has taught them, which is it is all about them. It's all about them coming. You know, it's all about making sure that they have a good time, no matter what lovely young men they are. And so this has to start in the home, and it has to start with understanding this is about bringing your children up to behave well sexually, to operate good sexual values and good sexual behavior as much as you bring them up to behave well in every other respect.
Hear to that. And I think, Cindy, you also raise a really important and what should be a really obvious point, and that's around pleasure. Sex is meant to be pleasurable. It is meant to be fun. It is meant to be joyful and intimate act between two, maybe lots of people, maybe just with yourself. But when we don't learn about it properly, we don't get to the opportunity to explore our own bodies and explore our own boundaries in a way that allows us then to go into a sexual situation and know what we want and be able to ask for it and in turn create the sort of environment that you're kind of outlining there. Jameela, you did I mentioned at the beginning, you did a BBC 2-part radio series a while ago on consent following...
I'm obsessed.
It was fantastic. I really have been, living in all of your worlds the past few days, and it's been absolutely pleasureful. But during this consent BBC radio show, you interviewed someone called Bitsy La Bourbon, aka Badass Burlesque Activist, who I fell a bit in love with. And you and I were talking about consent and kind of the issues surrounding consent now, and she said something that really struck me. She said, paraphrasing entirely, I can't remember the exact words, but she said, if we can't even talk about the good bits, if we get all kind of stuck about, unable to talk about the good elements of sex, the pleasurable bits, the joyful bits, if there's still such a taboo shrouding sex, how on earth are we going to be able to talk about the bad bits, the uncomfortable bits, the bits when our boundaries have been broken? Let's then talk about consent and pleasure and where sex education fits into that, because I want to make sure this conversation isn't just about highlighting how sex education helps to combat rape culture. It's also about encouraging us to have more pleasurable consent and more joyful consent. Tell us where sex education fits into that and helping us experience more pleasure.
Something that I wrote about that I think maybe led to that documentary, although I can't remember because time just faded after the pandemic, but is enthusiastic consent. And it's something that I care deeply about, and I've been talking about for years and years and years, that surely we would want to have a rave review after we have shagged someone. I know that deep down, that's what we all want. We all want money and a house and da-da-da-da, but really, we would love a rave review. And I think that that's something that we should be encouraging. And I think it's something that women are very programmed to try to make sure that, you know, we leave the bedroom with. I think it's taken years of my life even to suppress the urge to not wait even more than a second after sex with anyone, just be like, how was that for you? Because I don't know if I have permission to have enjoyed myself if they didn't. And I have very rarely come across anyone who is that interested in how it was for me. And so it took me, I think, all of my 20s to stop asking that fucking question. I think enthusiastic consent is the gold standard. I don't think it's consent, it's enthusiastic consent. And I think that I can't imagine not wanting to have a nice, safe space to learn some tips and tricks to make sure that you are a known legend in these streets. You know, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want, like, you know, a little tip here and there? And you look at women's magazines throughout the 80s, 90s, noughties, Cosmo, for example, always like 10 ways to make him happy, 10 ways to please your man. I've never seen the cover of GQ saying 10 ways to make her scream. You know, 10 ways to make her happy would be so refreshing to see on the cover of a men's magazine. And if you do not think that young men and young boys would flock to get that cover to find out, oh my God, I really want to know. They do want to know. Like, there is nothing that is inherently in men or boys that is not interested in being well-reviewed and in someone having a nice time. Certain people are going actively out of their way to try to indoctrinate boys and young men out of the idea that it is important to care about a woman's pleasure. Inherently, we are social creatures. We want to please each other. We want to be connected. It is being dragged out of. They are being indoctrinated. They are being brainwashed. We're all being brainwashed in one direction or the other. But I feel concerned for young men because I think they're missing out. I think whenever I hear women reviewing the sex they've had the night before with someone, I always feel really gutted sometimes for that man because I'm like, fuck, he probably has no idea. And it's scary for us to be the one to say something, especially if you don't know someone very well. They might kill you in their house. But there's got to be a way that we find a less stigmatized way to communicate to men that this is something that women really, really enjoy. And it's all different strokes for different folks, but I think sex education is pivotal. And I think that we just have to find a way to make it less embarrassing. It's so ridiculous that it's embarrassing. It's so ridiculous that it's okay for us to talk about anything else. But when it comes to the most important conversation of all, we think the best idea, like one of the most marking, experiences you can have for the rest of your life, the best idea is to turn the lights off, get your genitals out and wish for the fucking best. Everything else we can discuss, politics, like anything, but we don't discuss the most important thing. We just go dick first and vagina first. Like, this is insane.
And yes, it is totally and utterly insane. And I think, Jameela, you raise such an important point because when we don't get versed in the language of sex, when we don't kind of exercise, I guess it's kind of like muscle memory. If we don't get used to exercising that muscle around talking about sex, then when it comes to talking about sex in the context of intimacy with someone else, the stakes feel so much higher because it does feel quite embarrassing. It does feel something. I used to, I used to really struggle to say in the context of sex what I wanted, what I liked, because I just wasn't used to saying those words. I wasn't used to saying clitoris or vulva or finger me harder. Those weren't things that were part of my lexicon, and I felt so much shame and embarrassment about sex. And so I think, as you say there, the stakes then become much higher, and then we're not giving people the, in-person feedback that might help them increase their reviews, their rave reviews when it comes to their sexual
Everyone
performance.
wants a good shagging Yelp review.
Who
Come
doesn't
on.
want a good shagging Yelp review?
Also, I've just had a memory of my dad at like 60. It's not a trauma story, don't worry. My dad, when he was 60, like also maybe 50, and my mum was pregnant with me, and he had to be excused from the gynecologist's office because every time the doctor said vulva, my dad found it so funny that he had to leave the room. I was like, that has not really gone away. Like we have not lost that feeling of complete awkwardness, especially people who've been socialized in Britain. We really need to get a fucking grip and have a conversation about this. You and I were talking about the fact that Bitsy, who was in that documentary, says that she has a sex menu that she has saved on her phone, and she sends her sex menu to anyone who wants to meet up with her online, and they have to send their sex menu to her. And if the two aren't compatible, they don't waste each other's time. They just don't meet up. Imagine the hours, the days, the fucking vag shaves that we would all have been saved if we'd just had a fucking sex menu. I really think it was she blew my mind when she said that. It never even occurred to me. It never occurred to me that I could just advocate for myself in such a nonchalant way. And I really think we need to normalise menus.
Yes, and everyone, in fact, tonight, challenge for everyone. Can you actually go home and write your sexual values, as Cindy says, and then your menu? What is on that menu? And it's okay to have a couple question marks, you know, things you want the specials. You don't know what the today's special is going to be, that's okay. But to understand and to know what you want, to know what's on that menu, to know what you like, to know your body, means you need to be well-versed in the language of sex, which we are depriving young people of, as we are discussing this evening. Freddie, I want to turn to you. Sorry, you look kind of nervous every time I turn to you as our resident Gen Z man, which you are. So we're talking now about kind of the importance of, you know, learning the language of sex, and I guess not having that kind of social stigma surrounding this most universal of topics. You've obviously done a lot of research into the kind of Andrew Tate world, and I know you've interviewed some Andrew Tate superfans. More power to you. How do you think kind of a better sex education, one that is kind of pleasure-focused, consent-orientated, a bit more substantial than we currently have on offer, what Cindy articulated when she was talking about the Academy, what do you think, what impact do you think that would have on the attitudes of some of the young men who you've interviewed and who are drawn to the kind of Andrew Tates of the world and their ideas about women, their kind of deep misogyny?
Well, yeah, so look, young men want to be educated on this stuff, as you've said, Jameela. Like, they're interested, they care fundamentally, they want to be good at sex. It's not necessarily a competition, but boys always put themselves in these social hierarchies of who's the best and who's the worst at these sort of things. And they want to learn more because they want to be better. One of the things I think, and this is not necessarily cause for concern, but something that we should probably think about, is not just improving education, but really broadly thinking about this as cultural movement and cultural understanding, because people can be well educated, but if their values aren't aligned, they're still going to take bad decisions, right? They'll just know things. They'll know what they're doing somebody might disagree with, for instance. And I think it's really important for us to be digging in kind of a deeper level beyond just necessarily just the education, which we have to sort out as a priority now, to be able to get young people and young men to understand accountability and responsibility in a completely different way, in a different lens. That's something that's going to enable better communication and better intimate experiences for people when they get into the bedroom. And how do we do that? Like, that's a massive question, right? Like, it's like when you talk to an Andrew Tate superfan, they don't know, I don't think, that much about sex anyway. But even if they did, I don't think it would change them from thinking, well, ultimately, I've got a problem around intimacy. I feel very lonely. Why do you think I love this random guy who's constantly got his shirt off and his massive muscles? It's very confusing if you're kind of heteronormative and a bit kind of repressed about your sexuality. You know, how do you change that for that person to see themselves as somebody who has a level of responsibility to their neighbor, as somebody who wants to be and have a close set of intimate friendships, and not just partners, but friendships? You know, we have to think about those questions as well, because people aren't getting seduced into this world of misogyny just by sheer, you know, hatred. It's about isolation, fundamentally. It's about loneliness. And even if you educate people, you might not necessarily be enabling them to participate in our social landscape in a way that they find easy. And there's not an obvious answer to this, by the way. This is a conversation that we have to have all the time. I hope that one of the things that we can see change is that credible kind of like message carriers, you know, young men that other young men want to aspire to be, put these conversations front and center when they describe what their identity is, right? Like your friend Jordan Stevens, like he's massive on this, right? Like, and he's gone through a whole journey. Like I think most guys who talk about this stuff tend to have. But yeah, this is the thing, is that we need to, education is one step, but really we need to get a whole sense of movement that coheres around fundamentally about accountability and about responsibility, about being a good man, not just in your sex life, but in your life more generally.
Can I just respond to that point that Freddie's just made? Because I designed Make Love Not Porn to be fully diverse and inclusive, and we are. Our members, our Make Love Not Porn stars, are all ages 18 to 80, all races, ethnicities. We're a global platform: male, female, trans, non-binary, straight, LGBTQ, asexual. But in the 11 years we've operated as a business, we've discovered that Make Love Not Porn is especially a revelation to men. More men write grateful emails to us, leave appreciative comments than anybody else, because Make Love Not Porn offers them something utterly unique that men will find nowhere else on the internet, which is a safe space where men can be and watch other men being open, emotional, and vulnerable around sex. You would not believe the number of men who write to us regularly who all say the same thing. I just watched my first video, Make Love Not Porn, and afterwards I cried. I've said for years, I wish society understood the opposite of what it thinks is true. Women enjoy sex just as much as men, and men are just as romantic as women. Yet neither gender is allowed to openly celebrate either fact. We would all be so much better off if they were. I picked up a wonderful Twitter exchange some time back between two men. The first man had tweeted, as a joke, obviously, "Hey guys, got this really weird fetish. I've got this kink where I want to watch porn where people are honest, loving, loyal, decent, and really like each other. Hit me up with your hottest links, please." And another man replied and said, "There's this website called Make Love Not Porn where you can watch real couples making love." He said, "I watched a video where the woman said to her man, 'I love you,' while they're making love." He said, "Sincerely, I cried when I heard that." We have opportunities to demonstrate different things to aspire to that are absolutely available to anybody in order to shift culture around what is aspirational and desirable as a man in a way that actually will drive that connectivity and that intimacy that men are lacking currently. And honestly, you know, I completely agree, Freddie, it's about many different dynamics. But honestly, the thing that Make Love Not Porn has shown men that nobody else has is the extraordinary power of loving, intimate, connected sex in the real world in a way that nobody else is showcasing. And it's really important as many men as possible see that and realize everybody can have that.
And also something that you show on your platform that I think we've all touched on at some point about shaping people's taste via what they're seeing. I've had multiple friends, male friends, have to stop watching pornography because they find that it has started to alter who they're attracted to. So now they're starting to find a specific body type, a very, very restricted type of body type. So it's like the big tits, the small waist, the big hips, but the skinny thighs, which doesn't really make any sense. But that's what we're supposed to look like now, apparently, according to the latest dossier handed to women. And so they find themselves, it is shifting who they feel they have permission to be attracted to. And that means that rather than being able to date people that they find they have an actual romantic chemistry with, unfortunately, their penis is no longer responding. And that person may have been their taste before, but now they have been sort of brainwashed algorithmically against being able to find that person attractive. So then they end up going on dates with people who maybe look like the pornographic aesthetic, but then they don't necessarily have that chemistry, that pheromonal chemistry with someone. And so we are seeing a rise in youth, in erectile dysfunction in young men. We are seeing Gen Z having less sex than any other generation. There's all of this data that shows us that it is not helpful for them to not see reflections of people that look like them and people who look like the people they are attracted to. Anything outside of the kind of whatever fashion's new remit of what a woman's supposed to look like is treated as if it's some sort of a dark fetish. And it's so ridiculous. Men write to me all the time saying they feel shame about fancying a muscular woman or a very curvaceous woman or a dark-skinned woman. They feel ashamed of who they are naturally attracted to. It is so ridiculous. We are failing as a society because of things like this. And so I really appreciate the fact that someone can have, the amount of anxiety men have about dick size is just ridiculous. And women are complicit in that conversation. We are complicit in making men feel bad about their height or their dick size, and porn is massively complicit in making people feel, both genders feel worried about their genitalia. We are just giving everyone so much anxiety, and we're getting in the way of their bangs, and we just have to stop.
And that is a key point. We're getting in the way of people having good bangs. And I think, Cindy, when I was deep diving into Make Love Not Porn, just the variety of body sizes and shapes and ethnicities and couples and ages, it's so refreshing. And I think it really reinforces just how often kind of monolithic is the idea of the body and kind of archetype of beauty that we, I think, particularly as women, are supposed to have. We're constantly spoon-fed this idea of what we're supposed to look like, how our bodies are supposed to look, what size we're supposed to be, and we're supposed to have had, body positivity has made a dent in that, but still, I think we're kind of rowing back quite fundamentally, and I do think kind of a lot of mainstream free porn plays a big part of that. The shame we have around pubic hair, around the size of our boobs and whether they're lopsided. Yes, they are. All those things, when we don't see different bodies represented in our sexual media, we then feel so much shame about what we look like, particularly what we look like naked. Now, despite the fact that I think we're all obviously in quite a lot of agreement with regards to the importance of the type of social sex, as you describe it, that you are showcasing through Make Love Not Porn, you nonetheless come up against barrier and business challenge after barrier and business challenge. For anyone who isn't aware of the challenges that someone running a site focused on sex faces, can you just outline some of the biggest kind of business challenges you face with the business?
Sure. I mean, the one thing I didn't realize when I embarked on building Make Love Not Porn was that I and my tiny team would fight a battle every single day, not even to grow the business, but just to keep it going. Basically because every piece of business infrastructure any other tech startup gets to take for granted, we can't. The small print always says no adult content. And that's all pervasive. I can't get funded. I couldn't get banked. For 4 years, no bank in America would allow Make Love Not Porn to open a business bank account. Try doing business for 4 years without a business bank account. Can't tell you how I did it, did in ways I shouldn't have, makes life very difficult. Every single tech service I need to use to run a video platform, hosting, encoding, encrypting, the terms of service always say no adult content. In every case, I have to go to the people at the top of the company, explain what I'm doing, beg to be allowed to use their service. Sometimes they let me, sometimes they don't. It's a very labor-intensive process. We never get to work with best in class of anything. Our two biggest business growth inhibitors are, number one, payments, because PayPal won't work with adult, Stripe won't, mainstream credit card processors won't. I have to work with the murky subculture of adult-friendly payment processors, who, because anybody adult has nowhere else to go, charge extortionate fees. We currently pay out 12% of our monthly revenue in payment processing fees alone, versus a mainstream rate of 3% or less. That's a massive business growth inhibitor. The other inhibitor is we are banned from advertising anywhere. We cannot advertise Make Love Not Porn on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, I ask you. We're banned from advertising on Reddit, I ask you. And by the way, because you may not all know this, this is a gendered ban. It's not just us. Any female-led sexual health and wellness venture is also banned. Menstruation ventures can't advertise. Menopause can't. Fertility can't. In the meantime, male sexual health, not a problem. Erectile dysfunction solutions, welcome everywhere. And so literally everything is a battle. And I will just let you know that I am currently in a dialogue with the UK Government Independent Porn Review Commission, which a number of you may have read about, is ongoing at the moment. They reached out earlier this year to me. They said, we want to talk to leaders of sex-positive businesses, ethical porn businesses. And so I did a very long interview with them where I laid it all on the table. Financial discrimination, funding, I need government grants. And the point I made to them, and I'm happy to say in an ongoing dialogue where they're taking this on board, is the answer to everything that worries people about everything you've heard today about porn and sex is not to shut down, censor, clamp down, block, repress. It is instead to open up. Open up the dialogue in the way that I'm so thrilled we're doing this evening. Open up to welcoming, supporting, funding, and championing entrepreneurs like me who want to disrupt all of this to the better. And importantly, open up to allowing us all to do business the same way everybody else does. Because when you do that, you completely transform the landscape of adult. I like to repurpose in this context Wayne LaPierre of the NRA's infamous gun control quote. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a business is a good guy with a better business. That's what I'm doing.
Woo-woo! Woo-woo! And Cindy, that leads me perfectly on to then ask about the business case for why we should all want to invest. Jameela, I'm going to turn to you. You and the iWay team are lead investors in the Make Love Not Porn Academy. And I know this is one of your first investments, if not your first.
My first.
It's your first.
Mm-hmm. Took my little investment cherry.
We love that.
Why was this such a compelling business proposition for you?
I think I care about people's health and happiness. I care about women's happiness and safety. I care about men's happiness and safety. And I care about... I really believe that autonomy and agency is better achieved with information. And Cindy just ticks all the boxes of everything that I think would make us less of a lonely, less of a miserable, and less of a lost generation. I see nothing but more and more suffering every year that I am alive, and the statistics show that. And the only way that we would be able to have a chance to bring people back together is via information, is via opening up conversations, opening the doors to one another, opening our hearts to one another, and destigmatizing things that should never have been stigmatized in the first place. And so for me, this company is so much more than just sex, and it's so much more than education, and it's so much more than intimacy. It's built from a true love of people. And it's been created by someone with such a big heart, who's such a phenomenal speaker that I hate speaking after you. And I really think that you are such a hero of mine. I look up to you so much in every way, and the hurdles that you continue to overcome, and you still show up in your pink feathers with the same amount of gusto as you had when you first started this journey 15 years ago. If only I could clone you and make 10 billion of you and have you run all the countries in the world, I feel like it would be a better place.
Oh, well, the Cindy Gallop.
I ride at dawn for Cindy, you know, and I really believe in what she's doing. And I think that, you know, I don't want to have children, but all of my friends are, and I think that work like this would make the world a safer place. And so instead of putting children into the world, I could invest in someone who makes it safer for them, and then I've done my bit.
I love that.
Thanks.
And Jameela, I just want to pick something you said there. I think is so true and really kind of brings together so much of what we've been discussing tonight. Sex is never just about fucking. It is about your relationship to your body, your relationship to yourself, your sense of self-confidence, your capacity for vulnerability, your ability to show up vulnerably in the context of intimacy with another. It's how we relate to other humans. It's how we relate to ourselves. When we have the opportunity to have a good role model in sex, which I think your platform really does, that just opens so many doors for how we're able to cultivate the relationship we have with ourselves in a more productive, healthier, happier way, and with other people. So I really want to echo that. I think it always is. It's so much more than just sex, even though sex is goddamn important, as we know. Cindy, can you make the kind of, just to continue what Jameela has said there about her kind of business incentive for investing in your platform, I want to hear from you now too. Why should we put our money in the Make Love Not Porn Academy and your vision for the future of sex education?
Guys, I have a business that operates in the single area of universal human experience that we are all most engaged with, most fascinated by, and most fucked up about. Dollar signs all over that shit! But also, the point I've been making to investors for literally 15 years is, oh my God, the money to be made out of sex. But the money to be made in two areas, the second one of which people never think about because no one thinks it's possible. So first of all, obviously, the money to be made out of sex. We all have it, we all enjoy it, recession-proof, market never goes away. But the second area is, oh my God, the money to be made out of socially acceptable sex. When you do what we're doing at Make Love Not Porn, socializing and normalizing all of this, you then normalize people really willing and excited to publicly buy your goods, products, and services, and then publicly do what they currently do with everything else. Publicly review, recommend, share, advocate, and basically badge themselves publicly as proud brand ambassadors. That's the trillion-dollar financial future we're going after at Make Love Not Porn. And that is absolutely the kind of return that we want to deliver for everyone who has faith in and invests in us now, like Jameela. That's my commitment to you.
Huge round of applause for that. So we can all get rich, improve the world, and have better sex by joining up. Sign me the hell up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I just want to make very clear, I do not consider this my helping Cindy. I consider this me being very lucky to be a part of what Cindy's building, and that's how we should all look at this. This is a massive privilege to have the inside scoop on something like this that is so healthy, so holistic, so helpful, and so hot.
So essentially, get in there early. These are golden tickets, so you want one now. I am conscious of time. I have about 25, going on 50 more questions, but we are going to have to put a pause there. I think we should have a roving mic to be able to... Yes, we have one at the back. So we've got a few minutes for your questions. So if you just want to put your kind of hand up and wave. Yeah, we've got a question here, because it's not on the edge.
The stories we're hearing, specifically the Giselle Pellicott and... the stories of, you know, the IDF treating Palestinians with such sexual violence, it seems to be non-stop in like the news. Does it feel to you too late for adults or people, Gen Z, boomers, over the kind of, that have already been educated? And if not, how do you re-educate, you know, damaged? Like, I don't know what the right time is, but how do we re-educate adults who have already been, you know, indoctrinated by porn and miseducation?
I'll start and then maybe you guys can jump in because obviously over 15 years of Make Love Not Porn, I've had many, many emails from people who would describe themselves as porn addicts. By the way, I say people because I've heard from female porn addicts as much as male. And honestly, what I would say is fundamentally within all of us, what we want is love, intimacy, human connection. That is an absolute fundamental fact of life. You know, that is why so many people cry viewing their first videos on our platform, women as well as men. And so no, I mean, nobody is irredeemable. Nothing is irredeemable. You know, we can absolutely change all of this. I will just say, because I bang this drum a lot, but what is incredibly important, and I really want the audience to understand this, that the reason why you may look around at what is happening and feel despairing is because the young white male founders of the giant tech platforms that dominate all our lives today, they are not the primary targets, online or offline, of harassment, abuse, sexual assault, racism, violence, rape, intimate image abuse. Therefore, they did not and they do not proactively design for the prevention of any of those things on their platforms. And we see the results of that around us every single day. Those of us who are most at risk every single day, women, black people, people of color, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, we design safe spaces and safe experiences, but we don't get funded. Only 1.7% of all venture capital last year went to female founders, And that is why we have never yet seen what the future of the internet and technology, and therefore the future of culture and society could be when it's designed and built through the female lens, and here are the two key words, at scale. And so, honestly, when you fund female founders, you fund and you change a different kind of world. And I know that that is possible. I was asked the other day, Cindy, how do you keep going through all of the battles you face? And one reason I keep going is because I can see so vividly my vision of a world where we've taken the guilt, shame, and embarrassment out of sex, and we have enabled everyone to be their true, intimate, loving, sexual, and holistic selves. And by the way, the other reason I keep going is because I'm most motivated by the dynamic that goes, I'm gonna fucking well show you. You tell me it can't be done, I'm gonna fucking well show you. Put a barrier on path, I'm gonna fucking well show you. But honestly, it can change. The only thing holding us back as women who see a different world is lack of access to capital. When we get that, I promise you, all of this changes for all of us, and men, every gender will be so much happier when we get to make the worlds we envisage happen.
I don't have much to add to that, but I will just say that I agree with you. I believe in restorative justice across the board, and I am a reformed massive misogynist. I was publicly misogynist. I used to slut shame people all the time as recently as like 8 or 10 years ago, and now I won't fucking shut up about feminism. So I feel as though if I can go from someone who genuinely did not show respect, kindness, or empathy to women to now being someone who fights with everything I have, pisses off all my employers, scares everyone over my desire to make sure that we protect and fight for women, it all just comes down to education, and it also comes down to the fact that I was afforded the grace to be allowed a second chance to better myself and to prove myself. And so I think that, you know, there are levels of crimes committed that you mentioned there. I think there are certain, you know, different strokes for different folks there. But I think when people have fallen in line with something like misogyny or any kind of problematic otherizing behavior, I believe that if we could afford them the grace and a path back, that we would make this world a much better place. And I really do have such faith in people. I wouldn't engage in activism if I didn't believe people would change, because otherwise what the fuck would the point be? But also having seen such tremendous growth in myself and how embarrassed I am by who I used to be, but how much I have been forgiven and how much I've been able to forgive myself gives me tremendous faith in other people.
We've got time for one more question, so...
Over there.
Yeah. So much, I really want to take a different perspective that hasn't really been spoken about today. So 80% disabilities acquired in a lifetime, and statistically, the older we get, we become disabled. And so often, as well, the Health Organization says that depression is the largest type of disability. And I know my entire life, particularly here in the US and in the UK here, I was always excluded from sex education, like every single disabled person globally. And so how can we ensure that optimism doesn't turn to oppression? So what do I mean by that? Making sure that everything that we're creating in this great conversation is accessible, because disabled people, we have all the answers. Like Alice Morgan says, we are modern-day oracles. So things like access, intimacy, interdependence, revolutionary love. We are doing the work for decades and decades and decades, yet we are systemically and systematically erased and ignored. So I'm really curious how we can make things are not only radical, but accessible as well in these conversations. For example, this is such a great conversation tonight, but I would have loved to have seen hybrid live streaming, sign language, captioning, right? So who is excluded and who is part of the conversation is deliberate, it's decisive, and I'm not here to inspire people, so I just really don't want to call inspiration, brave, and so tired of that conversation. I'm here to do the deep-rooted work that we all need to do, so thank you so much for this incredible, critical conversation. I appreciate you all. And Cindy's also. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And I just want to give a big shout out to the wonderful Sulaiman Khan, who's just spoken, and his amazing company, Disability, because he's worked with us for years to help us build what we very much want to build, which is our Make Disabled Love Not Porn category. It is critically important that as Sulaiman's just articulated, people with disabilities are sexual beings too, which is not acknowledged in the medical, the care community. And we absolutely want to make love and sex and education accessible to absolutely everybody with the aim of changing that. And I also want to shout out MJ Lace, sitting there, who is also a disability activist, also working with us, and an investor in Make Love Not Porn, to absolutely see the same thing. We completely applaud everything you've said, Sulaiman. And by the way, the video of this session is going to be fully accessible for everybody. And it's just... sexuality and enjoyment of sex is a human right, essentially, and it needs to be accessible for everybody. And in professions, especially the embarrassment we've talked about on the stage tonight needs to be gotten over at a professional level and at a health and medical level to ensure that everybody is free to access sexual pleasure in any way they want. So we are utterly committed to that, and we look forward to building more on that with your and MJ's help, Sulaiman.
Thank you so much for that question. One more.
I'm Bansaka. I'm from Naked Politics, which is a media and educational organisation for young people. Just want to echo really quickly what was said right at the beginning by the first speaker around arming educators in schools. We know from our own reporting and journalism that educators really want to do more of this work, but they really lack the resourcing, the funding to do so, etc. I just wanted to ask, and the other thing I wanted to say as well is there is going to be a curriculum review coming up that the government is doing where they're overhauling potentially the whole of the curriculum. So anybody interested in sort of curriculum overview around sex should definitely keep an eye on that. But yeah, I wanted to ask a question actually with regards to yourself, Cindy, and just talking a bit about whether young people, how much of an influence they've had in some of the educational resources potentially that might be coming from what you're building. I think young people often feel like they don't have a lot of autonomy, right, or involvement, and they're not often consulted. So I'd be really interested to know if you've kind of consulted with younger people in building this project. Thank you.
So one thing that's very important to us about the Academy is that it will be where children and young people can access sex education without parental teacher gatekeeping. And I just want to share an anecdote with the audience about why that's so necessary, because I have a friend who's a mother, and as you have to these days, she monitors her kids' browsing history. And this happened a number of years ago. Her son was 8 years old at the time. And she saw to her horror that on the family computer, he had Googled sex for children. So she freaked out, but did the right thing, stayed calm, sat him down. Darling, I see that you were looking, talk me through what. This anecdote is adorable and horrifying in equal measure because her son wanted to learn about sex. He was a child. He knew he was a child. He wanted to learn about sex in a child-appropriate way. He sweetly, innocently Googled sex for children. You can imagine the kind of thing that came back utterly traumatized. And so the Academy will be where we are designing it so an 8-year-old boy can enter his age. We'll only serve him age-appropriate content. And we are planning to test the site with children and young people, as well as a couple of things. As I mentioned, we will have representation from educators who have a specific focus on peer-to-peer education. So another example of that is a wonderful nonprofit in the US called the Youth Sexperts that focuses on educating young people so they can then take that education out through the school, through the playground, etc. And another point I want to make is that we want the Academy as a safe space to facilitate the creation of educational materials that educators are not yet felt able to, because you can be so vilified and attacked online, which, by the way, has been the experience of some educators who want to be on the platform and won't because they don't want to put their heads above the parapet. And what I mean by that is, our center of gravity when we launch is going to be 0 to 18, which is very much where the need is. I mean, we will have, lifetime education, but we want to make sure we're very well represented in that area. And a lot of the educational material out there for 0 to 18-year-olds is targeted at parents or teachers in schools. We want to enable educators who wish to do this to create materials that actually speak to children at any age. And the reason you don't see so much of that is because any attempt to do that and distribute those materials is instantly attacked. But imagine the appeal, potentially, of Coco Melon, but for sex education. Because I've absolutely talked to parents who say, honestly, I would love to sit my child down with an iPad, have them watch an educational cartoon. I will happily answer the questions after that, but I'd really like something else to get them started. You know, so no, that is very much part of our plan as well.
Fantastic. Just as we wrap up, thank you so much for being such an incredible audience and for listening so intently and asking such brilliant questions. And thank you to my amazing panelists. Just to round up this conversation, I'd love, just in one line, I know you all have so many wonderful things to say, but in just one line, what is the vision of the future of sex and sex education which you would like to see? Cindy?
Honestly, a world without shame, guilt, and embarrassment around sex is a world in which we are all so much happier and so much more able to connect well with each other. So that's the world I want to see.
Fantastic. Jamila?
I echo exactly what Cindy just said.
Fantastic. Freddie?
Accountability, inclusivity, and hope for change.
Absolutely. And I'd say I want to see a world in which we're all facilitated and encouraged to have a relationship to our bodies that allows us to experience the depth and breadth of pleasure these bodies are capable of. And I believe your platform is going to help us do that. Thank you so much. We must all now go and invest in Cindy's wonderful platform. Thank you.